Hey everybody, and thank you for joining us for another For Tomorrow webinar. Today, we are actually focusing on what many of you are dealing with in this season, and that's making decisions on returning to school and the transition to getting back into the classroom. And today, I'm joined by Becca Poe. Becca is a school counselor, has a very unique perspective, Becca, on dealing with this topic, especially during this season on returning to school. Tell us a bit about what you do and a little bit about your background.
Sure. Well, I don't know how unique it is these days. I feel like we're all learning every day with new varied experiences. But I am starting my 9th year as a school counselor. I worked in a traditional brick and mortar school setting for years, loved it, adored it, had a great time with it. And last July, I had an opportunity to take a position in a public school that was fully virtual. So I didn't exactly know what that was going to look like for a school counselor. For me, how do I reach kids? Half of my job is just to give them a warm smile and a pat on the back and know that I'm there every day for them to cheer them on or get them through a tough time. But I am 100% a lifelong learner, and I think it's not a secret that we're moving towards a digital age. So I was up for the challenge, thought that I was just light years ahead of my time and going into the virtual setting of counseling. And then 6 months later, everybody was in the same boat.
Wow. Nobody, I think, could have predicted this in a million.
No.
And what was seemingly so unique that your platform was completely virtual, dealing with all the topics that like you mentioned, a counselor would spend physical time in a brick and mortar location has now been through means of technology. So everybody finds themselves today sort of, you were ahead of the curve. Really, you've already been out ahead of all this a little bit. I know the waters are still changing, but you have that unique perspective because you have already been doing this to a degree. And not only are you working with other people's children, but your mom yourself. So you're navigating these waters with your own family. And so your perspective, I love because it comes from being a mother, and it also comes from interacting with other kids. So talk a little bit about what you're seeing as some of the main challenges for families right now in making these tough decisions in sending their kids back to school. What are some of the challenges that they're facing?
Man, I think it would almost be easier to say what isn't challenging. I mean, every day you turn it around and it's just exhausting for people. I think the specific challenges are too many options, a lack of the right options. I was listening to a podcast yesterday who they called it collective weariness as a culture. We just all have this collective weariness. And, there's a lot of shame and guilt that can go along with parenting under the best of circumstances. Sure. Right now, we're torn between what is the best decision for my child's safety physically versus what's best for their mental health or for their social lives. I think parents in general just feel like we're stuck between a rock and a hard place, even if we're just looking at our child. And that doesn't even take into account all the other factors that go into, how do I do this with my job? How do I provide for my children? Yeah. Is my boss going to be understanding today? What happens if I have to take off 2 weeks because some kid coughed on my kid on the bus? There are just so many factors that so many people are dealing with. People feel like freedoms are tacked or that people aren't respectful enough. So literally from every possible front of things that feel important, it all just feels like it's piling on at one time. Sure. And it makes for a really hard way to make a competent and confident decision. And as parents, we are best when we are competent and we are confident in what we're doing. And it's very hard to kind of find that balance right now, just the way that things have shook out. There we go.
Yeah. Well, so what do you say to these parents? Because I feel like in these instances, across news media, social media, there are lots of different people in a lot of different places. Some are pro, let's get back to school. Some are very apprehensive. Some want their kids back in school, but are very reserved because of the conditions. So I think often when you get in a position like that, if you're fearful, you could become paralyzed. It's hard to make a decision about what to do because ultimately, just what you mentioned, you want the best for your child in every possible way, physically, emotionally, mentally. So what are you saying to parents who are just maybe feeling paralyzed, stuck in the middle of making these decisions? What do I do with my child? Do I send them back to school? Do I not? What are some tips that you're giving them to try to help make those decisions?
Sure. And also, let me reiterate that I am that parent. I've got a kindergartner who will turn 5 on the first day of school, supposedly, if we're really there. She turns 5 on the day. So a baby kindergartner, a 4th grader, and a 7th grader who lives for the extracurricular activities that seem to be slowly being plucked away. 3 kids in 3 different schools. So I get it. I really do. I think the most important tip right out of the gate is really, really, really try to have these hard conversations away from the kids first. Get yourself cool, calm, and collected because you have every right to be overwhelmed and exhausted. But they're living this experience too. And we get to come with it with a whole lot more control and a whole lot more perspective than they do. So if we can just protect them from as much of our crazy as possible, they're going to have their own they have to face and deal with. So get yourself right first. Find your community. Find your support. Talk out the good, bad, and ugly. Don't feel bad for it, but just try not to bring them on the roller coaster of emotions as much as you possibly can. And then beyond that, go ahead and decide as a family, what are your non-negotiables? Realistically, what can you do? Do you have to go to work every day, or is there flexibility? Figure out honestly what you have to do and what those options are for your family. But that's an adult decision. So you make that decision first, and then you go to your kid and you say, this is what we know today. I want you to be an owner of your own learning. So you tell me within this structure of your options, what can I do to help? What can I do to make this better? So for my own kids, what that looked like was they are going to school in person, whatever that looks like. But their only thing they came back to say was, Mom, please don't make us ride the bus with a mask on. Please. And that'll be hard to figure out carpool and the logistics, but it's not outside of the realms of possibility. So it supports them. It doesn't totally destroy our family structure, but it's something. And then also be honest with them and talk to them about the realities. If you know your 6-year-old's going to be in a mask all day long, talk to them about the realities of that. Practice washing their hands. As all this school information comes in, go ahead and start trickling that in for your kids and practicing while they have your full support here at home. So it's not just coming at you out of nowhere.
That's good. I like that. So basically, I mean, I think that's important because our kids are watching, they're following our lead. On security and safety in knowing that we know what we're doing, even if we really don't, you know. So I love that. Get a plan as a parent first and then have those conversations with your child. It helps to prepare them in whatever environment that is chosen. And so as people are making those decisions, having these conversations with their kids, I do think there is a little bit, maybe, is it an advantage that a child and a family has the support of the teachers physically interacting with the kids versus maybe if there's the parents taking on kind of the full responsibility if it's virtual? So in that sense, I mean, how are you helping parents navigate the virtual world if they are having to suddenly become the facilitator of learning inside their home? And navigating this unknown world for many families? Are there some things that you can do to help parents and kids adjust to this new form of learning?
Sure. So I don't want any parent who's going into the virtual setting to feel like suddenly they are a standalone homeschool teacher, because that is certainly not the case. You're still going to have the teacher who is mapping out curriculum and is literally a phone call or an email away who is still going to pick up on those red flags of your child or see those strengths that you might not. And I absolutely love, in whether you're talking public school or community or a homeschool community, I love the idea of different people laying eyes on my child and being able to speak strengths or, speak the perspective that I don't have. So I absolutely think that there's benefit in having more than one adult. One of the things I have loved the most about being a virtual school counselor is that I get to partner with parents in a way that I never had an opportunity to before. So I kind of get to teach and give away my job to parents, where of course I would have done that in the brick and mortar school, but I was with the student. So I was just going to sit there and do it. Same thing for teachers. If they're right there with your kid, then they're going to say, hey, put this white sheet of paper over and just read one line at a time and your eyes won't be as overwhelmed. But if mom or dad or whoever is teaching that child at home is the one doing that, then it's kind of twofold, because that teacher is going to say, hey, have you tried to show them how to use the paper trick? And then not only does the child benefit, but you're a parent who's empowered and learning, and you get to share that. So I think there's just pros and cons to both. It's just a matter of finding the positive. There are going to be things that are hard about both options, period. They're not going to be a secret, but there are absolutely unique, cool things that are going to happen this year that we've never had an opportunity to see before. So we get to choose where we put that focus on.
That's great. I think you just probably empowered and encouraged some parents right there, because there are some I know who are making this decision to do virtual learning and they are scared to death.
I'm sure
that the support is there, that you've already been doing this to a degree, and you have already experienced some of these things. So to know that they're going to be supportive and that a good, positive environment, even in the homes where parents are a little apprehensive about doing it, it can be a positive experience. I love that you mentioned that there are going to be different people still watching, the teachers observing the child's learning, and we'll notice some red flags if there's just some challenges there. What would you say to parents who maybe are noticing that maybe their kids are struggling in the physical environment because of the changes, or they're struggling in the virtual environment? What would you tell them to do? What's the first response that they need to take?
First response, again, get yourself cool, calm, and collected. We always, as educators, talk about the summer slump. And I don't know if that's regular talk out amongst parents who aren't educators or not, but kids naturally regress a little bit over the summer. Sure. Teachers come in guns blazing in August, ready to amp up our kids because they haven't been reading constantly. They actually went outside to play for a minute. We are likely going to see a pretty epic summer slump that our teachers and our parents will be empowered and prepared to move along. Everybody is dealing with the same thing. Globally, it ain't just Alabama. Globally, we're all going to be dealing with that. So first, just take a deep breath, because if your child was reading on this reading level the last time you had a conference with a teacher in October, and all of a sudden your kid dropped a letter, just take a deep breath and realize that so much of that is just in practice and consistency. It's nothing that can't be resolved. Beyond that, our state has some really good measures that are in place. Your kid is going to have required little assessments that they're going to take throughout the year that are going to red flag for things. Okay, this is where we should be on pace. Those numbers will be compared with peer groups that are in the same boat as your child. All of special ed testing, 504s for students who have disabilities, who need some extra support. All of those things are still in place. Those meetings might take place over a Zoom call, but your best bet is to first control what you can control in your home, if that's where the learning environment is. Make sure that your student is set up in a proper learning environment without a bunch of distractions as best as you can. I've got 3 kids. I've got a kid who's going to be trying to do pre-algebra with a 5-year-old around. I'm going to have to be very strategic in, hey, bud, I can get her out of your hair for 30 minutes, but it's go time. Do you hear me? Control what you can control in your environment. And then beyond that, reach out to your teacher. They're your first line of defense. They know where things go. If in a rare case that's a dead end or you don't feel comfortable with that, your school counselor or your school administrator is a great next step to point you in the right direction. But try to show a lot of grace. Everybody's learning. None of us have been here before. We're all just kind of figuring it out as we go.
I'm glad you used that word, because that's what I was hearing in this whole understanding of we're in this together.
Yes.
Everyone is walking through this. We're not alone. You said it's across the country, and it just takes a lot of grace. So parents, give your kids some grace. Kids are going to have to give their parents some grace, their educators, the administration. I mean, all across the board, we're just going to have to work together and give some grace. But those are great tips, I think, really empowering and educating for parents who are making these decisions. Is there anything else you would say? I mean, just that you've been navigating or thinking about through this process as we're getting closer to getting back into schools, or just anything that you think would be really helpful for people to know?
Sure. One thing that just came to mind and tacking that on, don't forget that the first week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks of school, these teachers teach nothing but procedure. They literally learn how to line up and go to the bathroom. They literally learn how to hold a pencil. They literally learn those things. So don't be shocked if you feel like you've got chaos at your house and your kid doesn't know what to do. If you need to take the first week or two of school to set procedures and expectations and boundaries within that learning space, do it. It is not a waste of time.
Yeah.
And then just on a larger scale in general, and it goes in with grace, I've talked to so many people on a professional level and a personal level lately. And I had a friend say the other day, I just take everything so personally. When somebody doesn't do this or when someone chooses this, it personally affects me. And my heart went out to her so much. And I fully understand that. And everybody else feels that way right now too. There is none of this that isn't impacting somebody on such a deep and personal level. And it'd be really easy if everybody walked around with a little postcard on their forehead of all the hard things they dealt with that day or all the struggles that they had. But that's not how life works. Yeah. We just kind of have to give a little bit of space and breath and assume that maybe I don't get to know everything, but maybe I can give you a little bit of margin and a little bit of space and a little bit of room and give us all permission to feel without having to be so raw about it all the time. So I don't know. It's a lot for a lot of people right now. I think people have good days and bad days. So when it's your good day, be prepared to stand in the gap for somebody else, because it's 100% somebody else's bad day on the other side of the coin. Good. And you'll want that gap. You'll want somebody standing in that for you.
We're all in it together. Grace.
Yes.
Well, Becca Poe, thank you so much for lending us all of this incredible information. Thank you all for just taking a moment to tune in and to hear what Becca has to give to us for this next school year. We're rooting you on. We are believing it's going to be an incredible year, even through the challenges. We know that your students are going to thrive. They're going to do great. Just as Becca said, don't forget, we're all in this together, and it's going to be an incredible school year coming up. We just believe it for you. So from For Tomorrow, thank you for taking time. Becca, thank you again.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me.